Live, where I get a chance to chat with luminaries in e-discovery and related areas. This broadcast is sponsored by Reveal Brainspace, the industry's leading AI e-discovery platform. Don't forget to subscribe to Watch Me, George Socia, weekly with leaders in e-discovery. Thank you for tuning in.
Good afternoon and welcome to eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACES and sponsored by Reveal. I am George Socia. I head up brand awareness at Reveal. This week we are broadcasting live from Legal Week. Obviously a very different background, maybe a bit of background noise, maybe the sound doesn't come across as well as we hope, but we're doing the best we can. I have here with me for this session, Beth Patterson. Beth was with ESP Connect. Beth, welcome.
Thank you, George. Great to be here.
So glad to have you here. Before we get into our main topic, I'd like you to tell folks a little bit about who you are, where you are, and what you do.
Thank you. So as George said, I'm Beth Patterson, director and founder of ESP Connect, and also an adjunct professor at the law school at University of Technology, Sydney. So I live in Sydney, Australia. However, I'm a dual citizen, so I grew up here in the States, so it's great to be here.
Glad to have you here. And now on to the main topic, dedupe, the dedupe project. What are we talking about?
So, George, the EDRM that you know so well, sponsored a project that I led called Duplicate Identification. And we set out as a group, we had about 25 people, multidisciplinary, had lawyers, service providers, product platforms, Reveal, Relativity, EDT, and Nuix, and law firms. And we had representation from about 7 countries.
Right,
and
multiple continents.
Multiple continents. But we set out to solve the cross-platform duplicate identification. Anybody who's been in this,
what is the challenge then? What was the problem?
Anybody who's been in this game, as long as you and I have, knows when you receive data from other parties that have been processed in different platforms, MD5s don't match. So you have to reprocess data, which costs clients a lot of money. So what we did was set out to solve that problem.
How about a little bit of the process of solving the problem and then what we've got to solve it?
Well, George, you were intimately involved in that process, which took us 2 years. So it was no small undertaking. And I guess just to give people a bit of background, the scope we started with wasn't where we ended. In good design thinking terms, we iterated and we sort of set out, I thought we would probably come up with what fields are used for deduplication and the order, and then ask vendors like Reveal to implement it. But that's not what we did. We decided that was too hard. We figured out how complicated that would be and decided to pivot just to emails and do a low-touch, simple, open solution. So deduplication will continue as it is on every platform. We're not trying to change that world. We expect that people who use our solution will have already probably deduplicated their data through a platform. So the problem we pivoted to was the cross-platform problem, where you need
getting data from this platform to that platform and maybe to that platform after that.
Right? Exactly. And when you have multi-party litigation or investigations and you're friendly with another law firm, but they used a different vendor's product, you can't share data. So we're excited about the possibilities of how this might get used in our industry to save time and money, basically.
What then does the solution look like?
Yes. Now, here's the techie stuff.
Yep.
I'll try not to be too techie because it's really simple, actually. There's a field called message ID in every email that goes across the internet. There's a standard for message ID that has to be complied with in order for it to travel across the internet. It's unique. So our solution is to take a hash of that message ID, and hash means a unique digital footprint. And that's called the message ID hash, or the EDRM message ID hash, or the EDRM MIH. And basically what we want is products like yours to implement that so it's easy for your users when they're asking for processing to be done, request the MIH.
So why not just take that unique message ID and use that? Why hash it?
You and a million other people have asked that question, George. And the answer is there actually is some proprietary information, confidential, potentially like domain names in some message IDs. So we wanted to strip out anything which is confidential or privileged or proprietary. And so we decided to hash it. The other benefit of hashing it is the hash value is always the same length, where message IDs can vary in length. So some people think, oh, why on earth would you do that? There were some really good reasons that the committee as a group decided upon. And I have to say it did get debated a lot.
So this is for email. Why only email?
We decided, as we identified the problem, as I explained earlier on, it was so complex, just getting every product provider to pull out a message ID consistently is harder than you think. And so we decided to scope it down to email. Other data types we may do in the future, but email is the low-hanging fruit because message ID is unique.
Will this then work with every email message you have? All these leading
Yes.
questions here.
That's a loaded gun question.
Yes.
The way we've positioned it is it will work with all the current platforms. We don't expect that it will work with some legacy platforms, but certainly, the common ones, Microsoft email, etc.
Any exceptions? I mean, okay. A message that was never sent doesn't yet have a draft message, doesn't have a message ID yet, right?
So it's a great question. A lot of time, I should talk about the testing.
Yes.
We spent probably over a year doing testing, and we started with publicly available data sets. The Podesta emails, Jeb Bush, everybody knows those data sets. We did a lot of testing against those data sets. And then, luckily, we had a lot of members of our committee who have big client data sets, and they tested across millions of emails. So in that testing, we found some things. Some people would say they're problems. Some people would say, actually, it's really helpful. And that was the interesting thing in that exploration. We purposely called it duplicate identification because you can, once identified, you may use it in different ways. One is deduplication, which everyone knows. Another is to actually group like emails together for review. So we came up with a list of considerations, and like any good e-discovery tool, you need to know what you're doing to apply it, and you need to understand your data set and whether it's going to work or not. So example of one of our considerations, draft emails, which haven't been sent across the internet, don't have a message ID.
Right.
So clearly they're not going to get picked up with the MIH. So you're going to need to do something different if drafts are important. And in a lot of cases, drafts are important. So you might combine a search with MIH in another field, for example. Another really common problem is headers and footers. And in some cases, they are just extraneous. But deduplication algorithms will actually not identify them as duplicates because the sent version doesn't have the header and footer because they get put on through the server as it leaves your organization. So the received one will have the header and footer. So our algorithm, the MIH, will identify that as a potential duplicate. So some matters, that's super useful. Some, if a signature, for example, is an important piece of data and it gets put on as a footer piece as it goes out the door, well, then you got to make sure maybe you're going to combine the MIH with another field.
Are there So it's all based on the message ID. Is there the possibility that one message ID possibly would appear with two different email messages?
The answer is yes. But message ID is defined to be unique,
Okay.
right? It's defined to be unique. But in our testing, some spam emails use the same message ID,
Okay.
right? So that's one of our considerations.
Yep.
So we've identified, based on a lot of testing, a range of considerations. We expect that the MIH will have a life, and people will give us feedback. And in fact, we're inviting people to really test this and give us feedback. We hope we found most things. Maybe there's some things we didn't find, but we will build that back into our protocols.
I know this might sound like I'm bringing this to a close, but I'm not. For people who want to find out more information about this project and what they can do in connection with it, what sort of resources are available for them?
Great question. On the EDRM website, under Dupe ID project, there's a whole list of resources. And I'll just tell you a little bit. The project team was very thoughtful about the resources we built. So the first is the specification itself, which we expect product vendors to use when they're implementing it. And it's a tech document. It's like any spec that a technical person would expect. We've written it like that. The second, and perhaps most important thing that we created, were the guidelines. And it's for practitioners who want to use the MIH to understand. So the considerations, for example, that I spoke about are in that document. We have a FAQ, we explain why we did things, etc. So that's a great resource. The third piece is an actual infographic. We know people really want sound bites these days, so we've reduced the problem in our solution into a one-pager. So if you're trying to convince your lawyers to use this, it's a great resource. And finally, the infamous Craig Ball, who is an intimate member of our committee, wrote a white paper for lawyers. So we want lawyers to actually ask for this, but they've got to be convinced as to the why. I think the why is compelling, but they might not. So the white paper is written to help convince them, and we believe there'll be tremendous cost and time savings.
For people who want to gain access to these materials, where do they go?
Go to the EDRM website. I don't know their exact
edrm.edrm.net.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's it. That's
Yeah.
where they go.
Is this spec available actually to use today?
Absolutely.
Where and how?
So it's at the EDRM website. There were 4 product vendors that I mentioned earlier, including Reveal. Pleased to say, I understand it's actually been put into your product. What we're going to be doing is putting links on the EDRM website of all the products that are capable of producing the MIH. And it's self-regulated. So they're going to implement it, let us know, and EDRM will publish a link to the materials to explain how to use it in specific products.
So if I remember correctly, those 4 providers all either can or soon will be able
Absolutely.
to. Yep.
We expect within the next 2 to 4 weeks to get their information up on the EDRM website.
So Reveal, Relativity, EDT, and Nuix, right?
Exactly.
Anybody else in the queue that you know of?
There's a few that have told us that they will be implementing it. We expect to. TBD.
Yep.
I know Merlin, John Trednick's product, several other ones, but we'll be publishing that up on the EDRM website. So if you are a product vendor, come see us because we want you to put this into your tool. Put a bit of a plug in there. One other thing I should mention, George, there are a few more resources. We decided to build some tools. So not everybody's going to have access to a platform like yours.
Right.
And so we wanted to cater to the smaller players in the market as well. So we've created an Excel spreadsheet. We debated macros versus web service calls, et cetera, because of all the security concerns. And we ended up with an Excel spreadsheet that has a web service call. So you may need to talk to your cyber people to get it through, to be able to use it, but it's simple.
So
And
what does that do?
basically, you can put in a list of, copy and paste a list of message IDs. It'll calculate the MIH, so it'll do the hashing for you. And then you can copy those hash values out and use them in whatever way.
And put them in a DAT file or whatever it is you're
and
doing.
load it back into
Right.
your database.
Yep.
The other tool, as we were working through our tool set, we had a member of our committee that said Notepad++ actually does it. You can calculate a MD5 of a message ID because it allows you to hash any field of data. So we've got instructions on how to use that tool as well. And finally, we've got a member of our team that's written an amazing tool we've used in our testing, and they're going to modify that, and we'll be releasing that on the EDR website probably over the next couple months. But it's exciting because what it'll do is read, for example, PST, so email files, pull out the message ID, and calculate the MIHs.
Well, that means people will have a range of options for how to make effective use of this.
Exactly.
What are, I mean, you've mentioned a few, what are the use cases?
Yeah. I think there's a big range, but the most common is when we're exchanging data between parties. We've talked about it in a normal exchange. Basically, what you want when you get somebody else's data is to know what do they have that we don't have, and what do we have that they don't have. And so for emails, if the MIHs are exchanged, you'll know, you'll be able to identify that. Couple interesting ones that came up. One is if you have a cross-border case and you don't want to move your data between jurisdictions for all the reasons that people are familiar with, you can actually just exchange the MIH. So it's unique, it's confidential.
Right.
It's simple.
It's not reverse engineerable. So.
Exactly.
Yep.
And another one, we had a guy who works for Deloitte in our team in Japan. And he identified in the testing some of the language filters. There are multiple ways you can get Japanese into a product, as I understand. And so when you tried to deduplicate emails, while they looked, the Japanese characters looked the same, the actual technical representations weren't the same.
Okay.
But with the message ID hash,
that issue goes away.
the issue goes away.
Yep.
Yeah.
Anything else to tell us about this?
I was going to ask you, George. I'll turn it back on you.
Okay.
What's a use case that you see that you think it'll be useful for?
I mean, I think that probably the biggest use is the type of thing you were talking about, comparing. What have I got? What have you got? What are the gaps?
Yeah.
Another use case is in the transmission of data. So I send you the data and I send you the MIH values. You receive the data. You run the whole thing. You compare MIH values with MIH values. It's a QC.
Yes.
It's potentially a QC tool for the data transmission process, wherever you're transferring it from and to.
Yeah.
One more possible use.
Another one that I think from the corporate side, corporate legal departments might use multiple law firms that use different platforms.
Yep.
But you know what? It's their data, but
That's
they
right.
can't compare across
You're
cases.
right. Yeah,
That's a
they
big
cannot. And
Yeah.
if they're not in a position to be able to consolidate it all into one place, this becomes their next best way
Exactly.
of dealing with it. Well, Beth, thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, can I say one more thing?
Yes,
Sorry,
you can,
George.
of course.
I just want to say to the audience, if you're a product provider, put the MIH into your product for us. If you're a service provider or a law firm, we want you to ask for the MIH in your protocols. And if you are a lawyer, we actually want you to instruct your teams to get the MIH because they'll save your clients money. And another big group of stakeholders are courts and regulators. We really, really want to encourage them to put the MIH into their protocols.
Thank you.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Beth. Beth Patterson is with ESP Connect. I am George Sosha. This has been eDiscovery Leaders Live, hosted by ACEDS and sponsored by Reveal. Beth, once again, thank you so much.
Thanks, George.